What's up, everybody? It's your favorite show, Get a Bucket. I'm your host, Trey, and as usual, I hope you're all having a wonderful, wonderful day. Today, we're going to talk about the NBA's West versus East Conference. But before we do that, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, comment, tell anyone who's anyone about the show. Try to get the ratings up a little bit, just a little bit. And if you wonder where you heard this before, that's because you've been listening with me Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I greatly appreciate your support. Now, like I said, we're going to talk about the West versus the East in the NBA. I talked about the WNBA West versus East, so definitely check out that if you got some time. But we're going to talk about the NBA real quick, right? I think it's fair to say that the West has been stronger than the East. And I don't know if I'm just talking about right now. I may be talking about for the history of the NBA. But let's talk about it, right? 2026 Conference Finals. We had OKC versus Spurs. We had Knicks versus Cavs. I think the majority of people, even though the Knicks won, I think the majority of people who are watching the game of basketball during this point in time were favoring OKC, then the Spurs, over the Knicks. Because I think people were looking at the Knicks' journey and they were saying, well, it was easy. Now, I think that's a bit unfair because, again, the 76ers were a good team even though they got swept, right? There was some context to that. But, again, I think the perception, at least, was OKC, then Spurs. You might have even said OKC, Knicks, then Spurs. But, again, Spurs were at worst case, top three in the conference finals, and there's only 4 teams. But let's look at the last NBA seasons, at least the last 10 NBA seasons, right? When we're talking about champions, the East has won 4, the West has won 6. We got the Warriors, the Raptors, going back to 2017, right? The Warriors in 17 and 18, Raptors in 19, Lakers during the bubble year, Bucks during 2021, Warriors in 2022, Nuggets 2023, Celtics 2024, OKC 2025, Knicks 2026. Now, again, we're still in that parity era of basketball where no team has won a repeat championship or multiple championships during this span. So I do appreciate that. But historically, actually, you know what? As I think about it, let's go through each era, right? Because I think different eras produce different answers. Like, for example, if you're talking about 1950s through the 1960s, like that era, I think it's fair to say that the East won it, right? The Boston Celtics dominated the league. You had Philly and New York as well, too. But again, like Boston, they kind of carried that era. That's fine. The 70s, all right, cool. That was relatively balanced, okay? Like that had unusually high parity. So I get that one. That one's fine. I think this era is going to be looked at as the 70s, right? 1980s, I think that was like the East at the top. West might have had like deeper. Yeah, I think the West was a little bit deeper in places, but overall, I think the East won the 80s, right? You had Boston, Philly, Detroit. They were elite. But, my Lakers, they did control the West a little bit. But we have some competition too, though. So, I mean, again, I think the East had more notable teams, but the West was doing their thing too. Now, in the 90s, early 90s, that goes to the East. But the late 90s, I think that goes to the West, even though Chicago dominates that era, right? Like that era goes to the Bulls without question, right? The West still did their thing, ladies and gentlemen. Like we still did pretty well. Remember, we had the Houston Rockets, Utah Jazz, Seattle Supersonics, the Phoenix Suns, Portland Trailblazers, San Antonio was out there. Like, ladies and gentlemen, we were doing pretty smooth. We were doing pretty smooth as a conference. So let's note that. Also, my Lakers weren't doing that bad too during these times. So again, let's just remember that early East, late West. 2000s though, West by a large margin. Yeah, it's fair to say it ain't even close. It was literally Lakers, Spurs, Lakers, Spurs, Lakers, Spurs along the way. Yes, we had Portland, right? Yes, you had the Mavs, the Suns, the Kings, the Rockets. Cool. Those were some tough times. Even the Wolves were out there trying to get a little scrappy from time to time. So yes, the West by a large margin in the 2000s was the better conference. 2010, West, yeah, I'm talking about 2010 to 2020, like the West overall, right? Granted, don't get me wrong, LeBron's teams, they did dominate the East, right? You had the super team that he formed with D Wade and Chris Bosh going to the Heat. You had the Cavs and the super team that he had with Kyrie and Kevin Love. So again, yeah, they dominated, but you also had good teams like the Raptors were solid. Pacers were cool. Knicks were straight. But on that West side, that West Side story, that joint was a little different. You had the Spurs, you had my Lakers. Well, I mean, we were there for a season. We were there for a season, man. But we mattered. OKC was out there. Grizzlies were cool. Rockets looked a little smooth. Eventually, you had the Warriors dynasty. Like, ladies and gentlemen, easily the West. So when I'm looking at this, there's only one era for the East where it's like it's a landslide for them, and that's the 50s and 60s. I'm counting 2 landslides by the West. So let's note that too. Now, in the 2020s, I think it's fair to say that this was mostly a Western era, right? Although it has been narrowing, right? It has been narrowing. But again, the 2020s, Lakers, Bucks, Warriors, Nuggets, Celtics, Thunder, Knicks. There are more Western teams that have won championships in that era. Now, it's not all just championship based, but that does matter, ladies and gentlemen. The East has improved. I can't deny that. But again, for me, the West continue to offer greater depth from top to bottom, especially when we're talking about playoff races. We have Jokic. We have Luka. We have SGA. Wemby's there. Braun was there. Like, that's a lot of notable talent just right there that some are considering in the top 5. Hell, Luka, SGA, Jokic, some people put them as the top dog in the NBA, top 3, top 5. That's a lot. So again, like, people call Braun the GOAT. Like, we were boasting quite a bit of talent, quite a bit of good teams. So again, when we're talking about the West versus East, I think it's fair to say that the West has the modern reputation because, again, we've had that long-term interconference dominance dating all the way back to the 2000s. We've been dogging the East. I say we because, I'm a Laker fan. Although this season I'll figure it out too. I'm not the biggest on the roster acquisitions right now, but that's another discussion for another day. But again, that long-term interconference dominance dating all the way back to the 2000s. Till now. It's a little closer now, but it leans the West. Then you got to factor in too, if a Western team wins a championship, does that make it a little tougher? Because if they go through a tougher conference, right? Not tougher, better. Because if they go through a tougher conference and then beat the Western team, isn't that pretty spectacular? Opposed to if an Eastern team wins the conference, because you can make the argument that their race wasn't as tough, so they don't have to battle as much. They don't get as tired, as physically drained and exhausted as a Western team. Like, that's something to note. Like, I used to call the East the easy East. And again, normally it's top heavy. So you might not get no real experience, no real presence until maybe like conference finals. Hell, we can see a really good matchup in the first round of the Western Conference. Like, I remember when we were still talking about the Clippers and Kawhi being a really good team, having to go up against a Nuggets team kind of early. Or how about a Jazz team versus a Nuggets team where, yeah, Donovan and Jamal were scoring pretty hectic. But again, those are 2 tough teams to go up against, at least from a record standpoint. So again, we can look at this as a multitude of ways. You can say championships may tell the story. It can also complicate the story as well, too, ladies and gentlemen. But I think one thing that we can't overcomplicate or can't complicate too much is the fact that at least from the 2000s till now, the West has, on a landslide, been the better conference. So again, when we're talking about eras, 50s through 60s, I think it's fair to say that the East had like an A+, West had a B, right? Shout out to Boston for raising that bar to A+. The 70s, I think it was a little closer, right? B+ is across the board. One of the more balanced eras in the NBA's history. I think, again, this era could be viewed as something similar to the 70s, but we'll talk about it. The 80s, A+ for the East, A for the West. Again, The East had Boston, Philly, Milwaukee, Detroit. The West, they had my Showtime Lakers, but it was really more dependent on one franchise. Again, my Lakers, just saying. The 90s, A at the top, but again, West, I would say A throughout. Like overall depth helped out the West in comparison to the East. So remember, that was during the Chicago days, the MJ and them days. The West did have some serious challengers across the conference, to be clear, right? You had like Charles Barkley, Gary Payton, Karl Malone, and them. You know what I mean? Like we had some talent. But again, at the top at least, the East were doing their thing. 2000s, West A plus, East B. Like it's not even close, bro. It's really not even close. 2010s, West A plus, East B plus. Again, the East had LeBron, but LeBron was in the easier conference. I do wonder, and I've been said this, I wonder if LeBron was in the West, would he have gone to 8 straight conferences? Or was it 10? Something like that. Something stupid like that. But it's so tough to get out the West. And that's what I've been primarily watching, 2000s, 2010s. And it's been so tough to get out the West, bro. Like if anybody got 10 straight conference finals out the West, I tip my cap to you. Off that, you might be the GOAT. Off that alone, you might be the GOAT, bro. Because I'm going to expect that you're winning the finals at a decent rate too if you're getting to the finals 10 straight times out the West. That's crazy. But again, that's why people sometimes have a gripe with the whole comments about 10 straight final appearances. Yeah, because the East was a little weaker. Now, the 2020s, again, the West, I'd say I'd say an A. And then the East, like maybe an A minus. Again, they have similar talent levels. All right, while I still lean the West, you got to acknowledge that the East is starting to creep back up. So again, overall verdict, ladies and gentlemen, early on in the NBA's history, we got to say that the Eastern Conference was the stronger conference. However, modern history, like modern day, yeah, the Western Conference got it. Like in dominant fashion too, by the way. Now, if we want to look at the whole history, again, I give the slight edge to the West as the tougher conference. Like you can argue that it's not the most historically decorated conference, right? I think it's fair to say that when we're talking about dynasties, the Celtics got the strongest dynasty. And then after that, we got the Bulls. We can argue my Lakers or the Warriors after that, but they got the top 2 for sure. So I think it's fair to say that if we're talking about, again, the decorated, like the top echelon conference, we're talking about championships, might be the East. But from top to bottom, talking about depth-wise, and it's not like the West doesn't stack up too, but we just don't have as many championships as the Celtics, at least in a row the way they did. My Lakers didn't get 6 championships in 8 seasons, 2 3-peats. We didn't do that. We came close, but close only counts in horseshoes and grenades. So again, ladies and gentlemen, while I do acknowledge that the West has had more talent, the more decorated conference at least comes off to be the Eastern Conference. And it's crazy too, because I just said that the WNBA's Western Conference was better than the WNBA's Eastern Conference over its history too. So there's really got to be like maybe there's something to it where the stars prefer to live on the Western Coast side. Like it's a little hotter, the weather's a little bit better in Cali than it is in Detroit. Like I get it. I genuinely do. It's a little colder out here in the Eastern Conference than it is on the Western Conference. So like maybe that's something that we need to pay more attention to, because the livelihood aspect does take a part in these decisions. I'm not going to be ignorant and just act like that doesn't matter. But again, ladies and gentlemen, overall, the Western Conference seems to be the better conference, whether we're talking about NBA or WNBA. But I'm curious, ladies and gentlemen, what's your take on this conference battle? Do you think that the East is a little closer or should win out this debate, this discussion? Or do you think that I'm right in saying that the West is a little tougher? I need to know your thoughts. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that does conclude the end of the episode. So please make sure to like, subscribe, comment, tell anyone who's anyone about the show. My name is Trey. I'm the host of Get a Bucket. I hope you are all having a good one. Take care.